took us 2 to 3 months. That's what made all the marketing and everything happen very slow. The platform was our biggest thing because we knew it's the success and the feel and the look. We wanted to give people a real conference. So here we are live in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem line. We came from an Australian Chicago, Munich session, and now I'm starting a session here with the amazing Michal Michaeli from Tel Aviv municipality, Tel Aviv City Global. You'll tell me how you pronounce them in English.
Tel Aviv Global.
Tel Aviv Global, which do amazing things, and she's in charge of economic development. Michal has a crazy also story as an entrepreneur and did a lot of things in the private sector, and she came to decide to help the private sector from within the system, and that's a really interesting story, and help the cluster in Tel Aviv. And on the other side, even though they're only less than an hour drive, Jerusalem, which is a totally different ecosystem with different kind of people and challenges and clusters within. We have Inbal Gutesman from SNC, Startup Nation Central, our partners that we love. Also Tel Aviv are our partners that we love, that by the way co-founded this event. And then about Startup Nation, we're all a big family. And of course, we have Benny from Innovation Without Borders, another community leader, founder, community entrepreneur that founded Innovation Without Borders, that brings together, and he'll explain better than me, innovation leaders from all over the world. So even though we know everybody around the world, we have 2 Israeli ecosystems, and I think 2 very diverse stories. And Benny's going to lead this panel. I'm going to hide myself and be a good audience and help facilitate talks in the chat. And if you want to have questions, just raise your hand. And I'm also blabbering until people join the session and we grow. And I'm going to hide myself now and let Benny lead and ask questions about how you guys are building the work in the city, the clusters that are relevant to your city, how you as municipalities / nonprofits / NGOs have the ability to build those clusters. We have a lot of audience from EAT and different people that are building clusters and ecosystems. And also it will be an amazing recorded session that we're going to use later on. So if you want to have some stage time, ask the questions also here in the feed, and we'll keep it and join it. So I'm going to hide myself, have Benny, kick-ass, Michal and Inbal. See you soon.
Great.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. So it's now 3 of us. So the session, that connects today Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, we will talk about how to build clusters of work in the city. And I think before we do that, I think it will be like give each one like a 1 minute to introduce themselves with the details, not just the titles as Mike did, so everybody will understand who do we speak today with. So Inbal?
Sure. So thanks, Benny, and thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Inbal. I manage the Jerusalem ecosystem development at Startup Nation Central. And before joining Startup Nation Central, I've been working with communities for about 15 years now, before community development was even a thing. Before tech communities evolved, I worked with young communities in the city around innovation and entrepreneurship, mainly for social projects. And I'm a social entrepreneur myself that have started quite a few initiatives. I'm also very passionate about leadership development. I'm a life coach, and I really believe that, it's all about the mapping and identifying our strengths, both as people and as cities. So my job, I feel, really combines everything that I believe in into one thing, which is Jerusalem, innovation, entrepreneurship, and ecosystems. So this is really the panel for me, I feel.
Perfect. Michal?
Yeah, so just let me say that it's funny because in Israel, it's known that we have such a differentiation between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. But actually for the last few years, the Ministry of Tourism had an amazing, very successful campaign talking about coming to Israel and enjoying Tel Aviv and Jerusalem under the slogan, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, 2 cities, 1 break. And I think this is something that we should keep on doing. And definitely when it comes to ecosystem, there's a lot of cooperation and there's a lot of discussion and things happening together. And specifically, as I said, I'm the Director of International Economic Development. at Tel Aviv Global, which is the international arm of the Tel Aviv municipality. We do everything that is international, starting from tourism, going through international media and communication, and economic development. We work a lot with startups and the innovation ecosystem, actually. And before joining the public sector a little over a year ago, I was mostly an investor. I founded an investment group focusing on women-led startups. And actually, I can proudly say that had a lot to do with the first female-led communities, startup female-led communities, like Yazamiyot, G-Codes, and other facilities. And before that, working for the high-tech industry in all its actually versions, starting from founding a startup, going through consulting and corporate. So I have the whole.
Great, thanks. And I'm Benny. I'm founder and leading the Innovation Without Borders, which is an organization basically that bridged the foreign representatives from here in Israel with the local ecosystem, vibrant ecosystem, let's say, of Israel technology and innovation. And it's interesting enough in connecting. We're working with over 50 embassies, so we're quite kind of working with a lot of different countries. And it's interesting that from every country, there's also an interest of cities to, attract Israeli innovation leaders to kind of move to their place. And I'm not sure what's going to happen now with COVID-19, and we'll discuss about it a bit. But I would say, everybody's fighting, and it's kind of the cities that leading it. In some cases, like Vienna, for example, is very active. To take and bring the best people into the cities. And I think that kind of brings us to the subject of today, about the clusters of cities. And I think it will be interesting to kind of hear your definition of clusters or networks of the city as you see it. So perhaps In'Bal, you can start and share with us your thoughts about this subject, and then we can drill down into kind of more specific question on the field.
Great. So first I'll start by saying that, we treat Tel Aviv and Jerusalem as very different ecosystems, but we need to remember that they're only 60 kilometers apart, which actually has a huge effect. And, in the Startup Genome report earlier this year, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem were actually ranked together 8th in the world. And the
six. Sorry, 6. Don't say two places.
Right. It was bioscience in 2019.
We were partnered in the report, right?
But it's pretty amazing that, two cities are able to take that place together. And I think, even though they are very different ecosystems, there's a lot of collaboration, and the proximity benefits both ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at ecosystems and at clusters, I started saying in my intro that I really believe in mapping. And when we look at clusters, sectors is one way of kind of slicing and dicing it, and, looking at cyber, looking at bio, looking at different subjects. But one thing that we've identified in Jerusalem is sometimes a cluster is made out of technologies or a few different sectors connected together. And what we did here is in 2017, before Startup Nation Central even entered and started working in Jerusalem, and I'll just say here that, our work in Jerusalem for us serves kind of as a test bed for what can happen in an ecosystem, and where we test all of our ecosystem development theories at. So we don't have presence anywhere else. So Jerusalem's kind of our beta site where we do a lot of our ecosystem development work. So when we entered, we did a deep mapping, understanding what are the most successful, clusters in Jerusalem, and where we could bring value to those clusters. So we realized, for example, the connectivity is a big issue, and that a lot of times, there are different sectors, but they don't talk with one another. And we see that today. For example, one of the strongest clusters in the city is bio, life science, and medical. And in the past 3 years, there was a tremendous effort to connect all the institutions in the city that do similar work. There's BioGive in Givat Ram, there's BioHouse at Hadassah Hospital, but there's also the tech transfer organizations that work within Hebrew, within Hadassah Hospital. And it's kind of bringing all the players around one subject to speak with one another. And that's really how you develop a cluster. It's not enough just to identify the startups. You really need to identify all the key stakeholders, all the different players around the table that can help each other grow. So even if hospitals are not, core tech, they're still part of the bio life science medical cluster because they have the labs, they have the doctors, they have the experts. So we've done that kind of systematic work around different sectors, and communities play obviously a really important role here because the community is a force multiplier. So what we see is, if there's a community around a cluster, it draws a lot of attention and a lot of experts to be more active in it. And the more active the people are, the more companies are developed, the more innovation becomes a thing in this cluster. So it takes time, it's very systematic, but I think what we've seen, especially I'm looking at the bio life science, I'm looking at the AI, machine learning and data cluster, is that there are a lot of different players, and once they're all connected and they work together, we are able to support a cluster and help it really become, a strong force in the ecosystem.
So the cluster, in how you see it, is actually supporting the members of the cluster, not necessarily presenting or working outside with it. Like your audience is the clusters themselves, is the people who contain the clusters, or are you actually working with the clusters, for example, globally, or who are your audience in this term? This is probably an interesting perspective.
It's a great question. I would say it's both. It's both, because on the one hand, we always work on strengthening from the inside. So when you build an ecosystem or a cluster within an ecosystem, you need to make sure that they have all the tools, they have, all the connections, they have all the facilities. Like a lot of it is infrastructure. But all that, is not worth anything if they're not connected to the big multinationals, to the big companies, to the big, investors that are coming to look for technologies in that cluster, which is what Startup Nation Central does a lot. And like our core business is to connect, Israeli innovation with global need, we call it need knowers, and people that have challenges around the world. We work with multinationals, we work with corporations, we help connect them to the solutions. So I would say it's both ways. A lot of what we do in ecosystem development is the work from the inside. And a lot of what we do as an organization is bringing our capacity and our capabilities to those clusters to strengthen them, externally.
Michal, the Tel Aviv perspective.
It's amazing to hear it from the side and see, since I've been actually at the beginning of the Jerusalem ecosystem. I took part as a mentor at CIFTech when it's just started, I don't know, like 7 or 8 years ago. And today, from the municipality or the government, in a way, perspective, it looks completely different. I think mainly because Tel Aviv is in a different stage in the ecosystem development in that sense, because we at many times feel that we just need not to interrupt. And it's definitely that we have to take part in those parts of the public sectors neglects or fail to really support, like, for example, the impact community. And one of the ways to do it was to form a municipality innovation center in the south side of Tel Aviv, focusing on social challenges, just to create that seed, just center that around it you can build the ecosystem that previously was a bit scattered and wasn't really a community, wasn't really an ecosystem by itself in that sense. And we identify as well other places that we can really support the ecosystem and really support those specific communities, even one that is quite prosperous and successful, like the eco-motion community, if you know, on the mobility side, which is one of our Tel Avivian strengths. Having so many, around 600 companies focusing on mobility and automotive. But then we actually understood that we have to support it by allowing them the test field that they needed, by allowing and creating this living lab that we have in Atidim City Zone that actually gives those companies a way to test their technology and find a way to work with the regulators sometimes, or eventually the client that they will be addressing, like the municipality. So it's completely different way of working, but I think it's important to have that body that really, as you said, is mapping what's happening in the ecosystem, finding those spots where are the weakest links and supporting them in order for the ecosystem to keep thriving and keep also benefiting the city and the inhabitants and the residents and Israel at all in that sense. So I see it as a major part of our work.
So super interesting to see this kind of match between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and see the different kind of perspective, and but on the same tone, not least successful cities, in different sectors. And I guess in some cases in Bad also, if you look at Mobileye, it's like a cluster that forced on Jerusalem suddenly to become the mobile, the automotive also industry oriented city. So it's interesting perspective, and thanks for sharing. I think the period now that we're living in, it's very interesting for cities, obviously. Suddenly that everything is online, and the physical city as a city is suddenly, we don't see the benefits of it in a way. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on the COVID-19 kind of perspective, and the clusters / communities in your cities, and how is it? What is happening now, and how do you predict it? Perhaps your insights on that. Inbal, let's start with Inbal.
Okay, so it's a really interesting question, and we've been asking ourselves that question for quite a while now. We have a project that is called Jerusalem Where Tech Meets Design, that really connects the design community with the tech community in order to create a nexus point between the two. And during May and June, we hosted a series of online webinars. It was called Staying Sane in a Remote World. And suddenly we said, wait, what makes it Jerusalem where tech meets design? If we're all online, a lot of our speakers were global. And we realized that a lot of what it creates, COVID, is actually an opportunity to bring that those global experts and the global voices into our city. So yes, you kind of lose some of that city magic and city representation in a way. But at the end of the day, you're still creating the same connections, and opening Israel or Jerusalem to the world has a great advantage. So, we don't need to think of speakers that are willing to go up the hill from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, or that need to take a flight from like New York to Jerusalem. We could approach someone who's based in LA and say, hey, we want you as our expert for our next event, which we're doing, by the way, all the time. I think in our last 3 events, we had a global speaker. And in our next event, which is on mental health and well-being, we're also bringing a global expert. So I really see it as an opportunity. I will say it also obviously has its challenges, because we're losing some of that magic of the Jerusalem venue and creating the community and networking. And I think those are the things we lose during COVID. But the communities were able to kind of find solutions very quickly. They still continue to do weekly meetups. They just happen in Zoom and in breakout rooms. They still use collaborative platforms to build things together. It's just that now, instead of it being only Jerusalem, meeting at WeWork once a week and doing a hack night, everybody meets, online. So people from Tel Aviv can join a Jerusalem event. So I think at the end, we will all benefit from it, but it kind of takes a little bit of the identity out.
So if I'm kind of mirroring what they're saying, in a way, it feels like the clusters that was developed in the city, suddenly in the situation that we are now, which is online, suddenly the clusters became the moving force or the engine and not necessarily the city. So because as you said, the people participating in the cluster suddenly can be anywhere, but the cluster that's created in the city stays strong and getting stronger, while the city as a city kind of, at least in the last months, obviously, is kind of losing the connection to the city.
Yes, but also I think like if we look at it in terms of employment, for example, you know, a lot of Jerusalemites used to take, you know, the train every day to Tel Aviv to work for a tech company. Suddenly they don't need to do that. They can stay where they are, be active in the Jerusalem ecosystem, but have their day job in Tel Aviv because it's not in Tel Aviv anymore. It's online.
Yeah.
The same goes opposite. You know, companies from all over can start hiring talent coming out of Jerusalem. And you gave the example of Mobileye, so I just like want to say a word about that because Mobileye didn't force the automotive community or cluster to develop here. It actually created a bigger cluster, which is machine learning, AI, and data science. And that's the cluster that was created because of Mobileye's like amazing exit and development. And Amnon Shashua is very active there, and there's a community with like 1,500 members. They do a meetup once a month, and they do a conference with a job fair. And that all happened because Mobileye was based in Jerusalem, then Orcam spinned out of it, and suddenly a cluster developed, and all the students that were in Hebrew U said, hey, we want to do more. We want to learn more, and started developing, you know, more activities around those subjects.
Super interesting. I didn't even think about the students that usually were, you know, the struggle of the city is the students that, not in Tel Aviv, that leave the city following their studies, and suddenly there is like this ecosystem that exists. Sorry, Michal.
No, but I think it's too soon to determine if it's a change that would be. But I think I again have a different perspective in that sense that I think this was the fear at the first lockdown when everything suddenly changed. It was such a rush change, and the move to online was like immediately and very frightening in a way. And it really changed everything. But as we get used to the new normal or whatever it's called now, we see, I think, as a city that though there was a notion in the beginning that people said, why do I pay so much to live in the city center when there's no theaters, there's no art, there's no restaurants, there's no nothing actually, and I better off go live in a kibbutz or a moshav or somewhere that I can afford more square feet, yeah, as you said, and enjoy the nature, because I can work online and still work for Google or Facebook, and before that they couldn't hire me because I wouldn't come unless I live around Rothschild Avenue. But now I can live wherever I want. But now we see then it's also around the clusters and the communities that those were the tools that even the city understood how to support and how to keep on using them to keep that city spirit. It's not the same, true. It's not the Tel Aviv non-stop city. It stops in the middle of the night. It's very hard to find, you know, all these open venues and events. But on the other hand, it transformed in a way. And you see what's happening, for example, at the Dizengoff Square every night at 11 p.m. The police sometimes have to come and remind everybody to keep the social distancing since it becomes the new place for the young people. But so people actually, after the first shock, I think, passed and now are trying to find exactly what's right for them in this new reality, really understand the strength that those communities in the city gave them. Because eventually you had the thing that were around you, even if the city itself wasn't supplying it in that sense or just supporting it, you had those communities that are very in close proximity that supported you when you needed it in crisis. So eventually I think people now understand that the city supports and give you more than art and restaurants and parties, even if you're not that young and you're still looking for that vibe.
Mm-hmm. I
truly agree with Michal. I want to add one more thing that I think like what COVID kind of showed us is that it's about the talent and the infrastructure, and that's how cities are still relevant. It's about the people that are there because you still want to meet with the people. You still, you know, talent coming out of university, but talent also that works and lives in the city. and the infrastructure, what the city can offer in different fields. So, I could speak of Jerusalem and say the fact that we have Hadassah and this, amazing lab, a new lab building that was built, through Biohouse, made sure that all the bio life science companies could still continue working during COVID. And, one day we called Shai Meltzer, who runs the Biohouse, and we said, so how are things with you? And he's like, everything's regular here. People are coming to work because we're essential businesses. Everybody has their own clean lab, so it didn't affect them at all. So I think those are the two things that we're going to see playing, a much more meaningful role in the growth of clusters in cities and how cities still stay relevant.
I agree. And I'll add to that, because you mentioned about the whole global exposure that actually you can facilitate and help the ecosystem and help those communities with your global connection and bringing those and keeping those connection live while there was a lockdown, while we had to adjust to the new. And this is, again, something that we can offer them while everybody was, in a way, in shock. We kept those events, we kept those panels and webinars and brought all these contact that we had from abroad, just to keep, even to give those startups and those new entrepreneurs this link to the outer world when the airports and the roads were closed. So this is also something that we really, I think they appreciate and understand. It's a vital part.
So before I'll ask the second question, I'll just want to emphasize that it's actually very beautiful to see the city these days, because all the, let's say, the coffees, the pubs, everything is closed. And when you go on bike in the evening, you actually see the city facilities active. So you see the parks active, you see the squares full of people, like Michal said about Dizengoff Square. I'm not sure about Jerusalem. I guess it's kind of the same situation. Eventually people want to meet. With all the social distancing, people will want to interact and still kind of creating communities and still being part of these clusters. And maybe because we do have in the audience, we have people who are community builders, who are interested in communities. Kind of, if you can emphasize the perspective of what can be done today with the cooperation of the city, or what is the opportunities that was not existing before, or how can we take this situation that we currently live now into the positive side and create something new, perhaps with collaboration with you, perhaps with collaboration with other clusters, just to highlight the opportunities that we do have now in the cities.
I think that one of the, I'm sorry. Yeah, one of the things that one of the sectors that actually flourished through this was the smart cities, because it was so evident that cities in so many parts of the residents' life need a lot of new tools and needed immediately to implement solutions that they were maybe considering or discussing before, but it became so evident that they needed tools now, and it pushed the whole subject a lot further. And then in that sense, it also, I can attest to Tel Aviv, that it actually abolished a lot of the challenges or the, sorry, I forgot the word.
Obstacles.
Thank you. The obstacles that we had, that we were setting before, working as a public sector body, that we were much opener to hearing ideas and implementing them and moving much faster, and really listening to those communities and understanding the needs, and not taking the long part of identifying it and going through the due process. They were working, not like a startup, of course, but in a much shorter ranges and really moving forward. And that actually opened a lot of possibilities and for those, not only the startup, also for the communities, to understand that they can really influence and change the life around them.
I totally agree with Michal. I mean, I look at, the two communities in Jerusalem during, starting from March until now, don't stop doing only, the online meetups. They continued them, but they actually started facilitating learning courses online. about different technologies. So there's a community called Make Games JLM that are like a gaming community. It has designers and engineers and programmers and a very diverse population. And they started teaching courses online. They've been doing, I think, 3 or 4 in the past few months on Unity and Unreal and different platforms, bringing teachers, teaching tools, and creating projects. And it's pretty amazing to see that, because not everybody could make the time for that before COVID. But once everybody's at home and everybody was kind of really like missing the human interaction and wanting something more to do rather to sit on their couch and watch Netflix every evening, you know, there was a real opportunity for the communities to start flourishing and offer new solutions. And I think, you know, yes, COVID is a very challenging time, but it's also the time of creativity, because in order to continue and be relevant, and in order to continue and evolve as people, you know, we needed to think out of the box. We needed to think fast, and we needed to adapt. And once we do all that, you know, pretty amazing things can happen. Like all 3 of us sitting on a panel, each one in their different home, but we're all connected. And I think that to me is like what the opportunity is here, and, you know, the opportunity.
And I'll add to that the fact that, as you said, everybody in the community started working on other things, but also to demand from the public sectors or the public structures to give them solutions and answer their needs, which were changing. Which also, we talk a lot about talking with the residents and having them on board in a lot of things, but this was really happening in action as things progress.
I think another interesting perspective will be interesting to hear from you is the global perspective of cities and clusters. And I think obviously, Michal, for you, it's kind of it's part of your title. But I don't know if you have any, you know, collaboration, global collaboration with other cities, with other clusters or communities globally to connect. That, you know, something that creates and suddenly the world becoming a smaller place, you know, because of the situation. So interested to hear your perspective on that.
So actually, even before COVID, we were very connected to a lot of the cities. We have partner cities, and we have like cities network that are usually around the subject, or a lot around innovation that want Tel Aviv to be. And then we found ourselves a city like Tel Aviv that, with all my love and admiration, is still a small city in the same group with Beijing, London, New York, and Berlin, discussing innovation, even before COVID. But actually what it supplied during at least the first lockdown was a network that really shared information and like peer learning, and we were discussing on a weekly basis, actually, for example, for that group, what's happening. And I remember how amazing it was, I think, like, really just a few weeks into the lockdown, at the beginning of April or so, when we had a discussion, we were talking, and each one presented what's happening in their city, even not in the innovation capacity, but in what was happening. Where is lockdown, where is not, how are things, how are the numbers, what are the trends? And then New York came to present, and they were talking about finding ventilators and looking for masks. And if suddenly it all felt we all felt like, you know, dealing with toys and not really into the midst of the store. But also later it helped identify what are the tools, what's happening in other cities. And you could see that everything that happened here, for example, at one point could assist other cities in their efforts. And also in the innovation sectors, we were talking about different tools to support the community. And this is something that is not really done regionally or specifically in different cities here, but it's more of the government level. But also it was to bring all these ideas from the world and all the different efforts that were helping, and talk to the Israeli Innovation Authority or the Ministry of Finance and other bodies. So it was an amazing, really, experience just to be part of that. And I think that eventually you see that it's strengthening, and as you said, it's keeping the connection even stronger and even more relevant, because we share the same challenges and we have to fight the same wars in the same. So I think it lowers the gaps between cities like us and New York, which are much more vivid in the everyday life. And we can support them and tell them what we're doing, and then later we learn from them how to address, for example, manufacturers of the fashion industry to work and help us find new masks and gowns for the medical stuff. So,
from Jerusalem perspective.
So Jerusalem's work, or our work at SNC Jerusalem, is a little bit less global. You know, at SNC we have different departments, and our department actually focuses on what we like to call beyond Tel Aviv, which is the Israeli ecosystem, but less on the global ecosystem. And we do have departments that deal with emerging markets and with the global, you know, the global markets that we work with and helping them develop their own innovation ecosystem. But we focus more on the local. Obviously, we have a lot of different connections, you know, on a per project or per startup basis. You know, we're very connected with global entities, but we don't have, you know, that kind of global coalition of cities that work together to think like you described in Tel Aviv, which I think is amazing. And I think, you know, one of the things that's beautiful about Tel Aviv is that it's so similar to a lot of those global cities that you mentioned.
And we like to think that, yes.
I think, you know, people think of Tel Aviv as such a global city, you know, and Jerusalem has a lot more challenges, I'll say. I mean, we're all very aware of them. You know, it's the geopolitical situation, it's the demographics of Jerusalem, which is about a third of it Arab, Palestinian, about a third ultra-Orthodox, and a third what we call all the rest. So I think for that reason, we actually look at Jerusalem on a more local level. We see it as a microcosmos of Israel. So a lot of the projects we start here, like our human capital projects, we're starting in Jerusalem, and then we're going to implement them all over Israel afterwards. So it's just different levels of thinking of it within the organization. So our activity is a bit more local.
I can add that this is, as I think I mentioned before, something that we understand that we can support the ecosystem by that we already had those international connections. So it's true that a startup or a community that already have international investors or already connected to their prospective communities abroad is at a better state, but not most of them aren't. So at least this is something that we are still doing, that we are working on using those connections to support the ecosystem here, even if it's only just having those webinars or events when we bring we facilitate this exposure to the global exposure, or even specifically we reached out to startup and said, you use us. If you need now help with, I don't know, a client in Amsterdam, a prospective client in Amsterdam, we can try and talk to our counterpart there if they can assist, because now we don't have those conferences and events that you can just go and stalk them and try to start working with them. Or if you want a specific pilot with a municipality outside of Israel, anywhere, or if you want to even get to one of the companies that they work with. So actually we are also working, and it's not something that we used to do before, of course. So it's the change in these times.
The new normal.
Yes.
But I do want to add one more thing, because if we're talking about, you know, clusters and, you know, and cities, one of the things, you know, that we've noticed is that the cities are a little bit less relevant. So I think if I look at Startup Nation Central as an organization, we also work with clusters, which are sectors that we focus on, which is agri-food and water tech, and industrial industries. And we actually had a conference a week and a half ago for Ag Week, and we're having in the beginning of December for I4. And that's where we facilitate a lot of those global connections. So we host webinars and we connect them, and we do a lot of our global networking through the regular SNC. So it doesn't matter anymore if you're a startup located in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, in Nazareth, or in Jerusalem. It really matters on the cluster, the sector that you're based on, and how the technology is relevant to those different countries and cities.
So my thesis of the city kind of that created the clusters, suddenly the clusters becoming stronger than the city. It's still somehow relevant.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to hear.
One of our speakers. I think we're coming to the end of the session, and I would like to use this opportunity maybe for you kind of last words, last things that is important for you to emphasize before to our audience to remember. Inbal?
So I think, my message about clusters and about cities is that every city needs to identify her clusters of excellence and understand what are the strong suits, what are the strong places where the city can provide value to the members. And, there are two ways to look at it. One is building a cluster from zero up. And, like we did with Techniques Design, it's combining two communities that didn't communicate and building a cluster. The other one is identifying a cluster like, bio, life science, medical, which 33% of the companies in Jerusalem are in those fields, and then understanding what are the strategic interventions you can do to help that cluster grow and thrive and connect to the world. So I think that is the most important thing. It's like mapping, identifying, and then deciding very strategically what you can create as value in order to support that cluster.
Super interesting.
Completely concur.
When the pandemic is over.
I'm voting for Inbal.
Let's have it over with already.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to get thoughts. But anyway, Inbal and Michal, listen, it was such a fascinating session. And it doesn't matter how much I'm embedded and doing this for so many years. I feel I'm learning every time we do this kind of session. And Benny, amazing facilitation. You're now in big trouble. You're going to facilitate any roundtable for our next future event. Especially as a partner, as a leading partner.
I just need a great guest. So that's all.
So great. So
I vote for Benny.
I'll supply them with guests. You do with the facilitation, and we'll continue doing great things together. Inbal, Michal, continue doing great things for your city. It's so important, and I know you all the time work with other cities from around the world. I know Michal has a lot of delegations, Inbal has a lot of delegations, and keep being so communal and sharing the knowledge so other ecosystems can learn and then collaborate even more. That's the biggest value we can give, our experience, our knowledge, our insights, and then get more from other ecosystems. So grow and prosper, as they say, the geeks in Star Trek. And grow and prosper your tech startups and ecosystems. And thank you so much. And if you want to continue a discussion with Michal or Inbal, just write in the general chat in the middle. You see there's something that looks like on the computer on the left. On your right, you have the chats. And the left one is for the session. The middle one is general chat that everybody sees. If I write now, hey, everybody, all the 100 plus attendees we have here are going to see it. I think it's close to 100 right now. And you can just write, I'm going to table 1, 2, 3 in the lounge and go there. And if you want to just serendipity, find people, press the networking. And if there's somebody online that will connect you, if not, just go back to the lounge and table and try to ask people to do face-to-face videos. And then people usually, what happens when you go to a table, they see 2, 3 people start budging in, and then really cool networking things happen. And we have also facilitated networking sessions during the day later on. So first, just I'm going to say about the next session. We have it about founder communities. If you remember Yaron Samid, Michal, you probably know Yaron, right?
Of course.
Okay, Tel Aviv. And so he founded some founders in Tel Aviv, but it became global. So there's Tel Aviv Boston and Tel Aviv in New York and Tel Aviv in location in the UK. So Yaron's going to lead a panel with different founders like Shachar Matorin from Startup Grind that We had yesterday Derek Anderson, that's the real founder of Startup Grind, but Shachar brought Startup Grind to Israel and talked about tech ecosystems and founder communities in the cities or generally globally. So hope to see you in my next session. Also, the other one is going to be about building thriving communities, about an amazing tool called Coing. You guys know Coing, the new platform? You know it, Benny?
I work with Adi. I was part of the first version of this.
So Michal and Inbal, I really suggest you join that session or just even check them out, because I know the guys from Venn. Michal knows Venn because they're in Tel Aviv. But the guys in Venn, they build their own technology, told me that they are like, really admire what they're doing in Coing, and like we're really trying to think maybe how to implement Coing into their value offer. I know Adi personally also, he was a member at my WeWork in Beersheba, and for 5 years he's been building this idea, and now in the last 2 years it's starting to get traction. So go do that session as well. See you in the networking table. See you in the networking, speed networking. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Bye. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.